All right.
And we are live.
Well, hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to our Planning Commission regular meeting of February 17th, 2021. I am Daniel Hubble and I am the Planning Commission Chair. In accordance with Proclamation 20-28.11 and the Governor's Extended Safe Start Order, tonight's Planning Commission meeting is using video conferencing technology provided by Zoom, much to my dismay as an employee of Microsoft. The Zoom video of this meeting is being broadcast live via Zoom and will be uploaded to the city's YouTube channel. I want to mention that Governor Inslee's Proclamation 20-28.11 regarding the Open Public Meetings Act was extended indefinitely until the end of this emergency. Deputy CPD Director Allison Van Gorp and other staff members are participating in tonight's meeting remotely as well. Other public audience members are listening to the meeting by telephone or by internet. We welcome all of you and thank you for joining us tonight. We will now do the roll call, and if the commissioners could all please make sure that your microphones are unmuted while Andrea takes the roll.
Chair Hubble.
Present.
Vice Chair Mitchum.
Present.
Commissioner Boatsman.
Present.
Commissioner Goodman.
Here.
Commissioner Murphy.
Here.
And Commissioner Weinberg.
Present.
Great, thank you everyone. During the course of the meeting, as we've done a few of these, if a commissioner does have a question during the portion of the meeting, please, you can use the raise hand feature, although sometimes it's hard to see that depending on if a presentation is going. So also feel free to raise your physical hand. I will do my best to recognize commissioners in the order in which I see hands being raised. And I appreciate your patience in the past in making sure that I see everyone. Like the last few meetings, I'll start by limiting everyone to one question. I'll try to go through everyone, and then I will go through another round of additional clarifying questions so that each commissioner has the chance to speak, and then before giving every commissioners a second chance to ask a question. I think we've done this a few times, so please feel free to, again, raise your hand to be recognized. So our first item of business is the review and consideration of approval of the minutes from our meeting on January 20th, 2021. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of January 20?
So moved.
Moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Boatsman and seconded by Commissioner Weinberg. Are there any corrections or comments on the minutes? Okay, hearing none. Andrea, do you want a roll call vote or is just a simple?
Roll call vote, please, Chair.
Great. If I could please have a roll call then, Andrea.
Yes. Commissioner Murphy.
Approve.
Chair Hubble.
Yes.
Commissioner Boatsman.
Yes.
Commissioner Goodman.
Yes.
Vice Chair Mitchum. And Commissioner Weinberg.
Aye.
And minutes are approved 6-0.
Great, thank you. The motion is passed and the minutes are approved, so thank you all. All right, so the next item for this evening is appearances. Tonight's agenda will not include in-person public appearances in accordance with Proclamation 20-28.11 and the Governor's Extended Safe Start Order. Individuals were asked for their request for appearances during this portion, and they had until 4 p.m. today to request their participation. I've been informed that no one has asked to be recognized during the appearances section. So for anyone listening, I will please remind members of the public that we do have email address through the city, and that's posted on the website. The commissioners here are all very good at reading their comments. So if you do have comments as a result of this meeting or for future business in front of the Planning Commission, please feel free to email us in the case that you are unable to participate virtually. So that will conclude our appearances. And that now moves us to the next items on our agenda. We have, I think, as most of you have read our packet already, I'm assuming you have, we have 3 public hearings this evening related to CPA 21-001 regarding the land use plan map. We have a comprehensive, which is a comprehensive plan amendment, ZTR 21-001, which is a code amendment regarding comprehensive plan implementation, and ZTR 21-002, which is a code amendment regarding CUP applicability or conditional use permit applicability. Individuals wishing to make public comment on any of these agenda items were requested to submit their desire to the senior administrator by 4 p.m. today, and they will be calling on you by name and telephone number when it's your turn to speak. For the commissioners, I have been told that there has only been one request to speak this evening on CPA 21-001 related to the land use plan map. The way that we're going to have to go through these is I have to open the public hearing for each of these individually. We will then take the one comment for the first item, and then for the other 2, we will open and then close the hearing as we move through this. Andrea, have I missed anything?
No, that is correct, Chair. And then once we get into regular business is where we'll move to discussion and deliberation on the 3 items before you tonight.
Great. Thank you. So with that, what I will do is open the public hearing for CPA 21-001 related to the land use plan map and a comprehensive plan amendment. That hearing is now open as of 6:09 p.m. And for those wishing to provide public testimony, I ask that you please speak audibly and state your name for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes to address the commission. And I will try to provide a reminder with a little bit of time as before your time has expired. And please know I'm not trying to interrupt. I'm just going to be giving a signal to you. So with that, we'll start with public.
And we have
Public hearing.
Carl Mount who would like to provide comment to the commission.
Welcome, Carl.
Thank you. Hi, commissioners and Chairman Hubble. I also am a much better Microsoft Teams user than Zoom, so I agree with your comment. I'm coming to tonight both as a resident. Again, my name is Carl Mount. I live on 69th Place, just south of the zone modifications that were being described in CPA 21-001. I'm also the treasurer of our homeowners association. It's a very small homeowners association, just 15 homes that are part of that small zone. Thank you again for your service to the city and the residents hereof. We've been in communication with city staff regarding the amendment, and we've been reassured that this amendment is just a correction of a previous error that was done. So, we certainly have reviewed the existing PBZ zoning regulations, the planned business zoning regulations, and been assured that those will remain in effect. As the only 15 single-family units in this zone, we mainly wanted to come tonight to express our desire to keep informed and have input if there's any other changes that would be looked at in this PBZ zone in the future. But in reviewing with city staff, it's our understanding that the types of uses permitted, the building height, criteria for residential units will all remain as is established currently in the PBZ zone. So I just wanted to come and say thank you for letting us know in advance. And we've reviewed them in detail and feel assured that this is just a correction of an error. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Carl. We really appreciate you taking the time to represent your neighborhood and the community that you're a part of there near the South End, business center. And certainly we have a great staff, and I'm glad that you've had a good experience with them getting the right information to you. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come and see us virtually.
My pleasure. Thanks again for your service, guys and gals.
Thank you. All right. And
Chair, we have no further speakers.
thank you very much. So if there is no further testimony, the public portion of this hearing will now be closed as of 6:12 p.m. And I don't have my gavel. I missed the gavel on the, on the dais. All right, so with that, we have two more public hearings. Agenda item number 3 related to, or I should say, yeah, exactly, related to the public hearing of ZTR 21-001, a code amendment related to comprehensive plan implementation. I'd now like to open that public hearing at 6:13 p.m. And for anyone wishing to provide public testimony, please speak audibly, state your name for the record, limit your comments to 3 minutes. My understanding is that we do not have anyone who has signed up. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chair.
Thank you very much. So with no one currently registered, if there's no further testimony, the public portion of this hearing will now be closed at the same hour of 6:13 p.m. All right, agenda item number 4 is a public hearing related to ZTR 21-002, a code amendment related to conditional use permit applicability. I'll call the hearing now open at 6:14 p.m. And those wishing to provide public testimony, please speak audibly, state your name for the record, limit your comments to 3 minutes. My understanding is that there is no one that has registered. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chair.
Thank you very much. Given that there is no one signed up for public comment and there is no further testimony, the public portion of this hearing is now closed as of 6:14 p.m. And with that, thank you, commissioners, very much. And we will now move to regular business. And I think, are we going to Deputy Director?
We are going to the city clerk first. So if she can give us a brief ethics presentation, and then we will dive into the rest.
Thank you very much. Well, welcome, Madam City Clerk. Deb, thank you for joining us. And again, this is agenda item number 5, related to the Mercer Island Code of Ethics and a presentation and discussion there within. Thank you.
Well, while Andrea brings that up, I just want to express to you all my sincere gratitude for Andrea's help last night during the council meeting. She was a superstar in that she, in a pinch showed up and was our second backup person in the council chambers, our go-to, our runner, our both supporting me as well as IT. And it takes it takes many stagehands to pull off any given council meeting. And last night took extra effort. So all of my appreciation and thank you, Andrea, for all of your help. You were amazing. So, all right.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
I was going to say, Deb, you can't have her. She gets to stay with us.
Well, okay, so tonight, this is just a very brief, as it states, an abbreviated training regarding the Code of Ethics. Andrea, if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. as you may or may not be aware, I mean, all of you obviously signed a Code of Ethics statement, but back in 2018, the Code of Ethics was officially adopted. We did make some amendments in 2019, and you know, it's a lot of how to play nicely in the sandbox, how to, you know, choose between right and wrong, you know, what doesn't feel right, not letting people contribute to how you come to your decisions and so forth. And this probably in many ways affects the Planning Commission and Design Commission more than any other commission, given the realm of the work that you deal with. Like I said, it was amended in 2019 to make some process improvements and add a little more guidance to acceptance of gifts, conflicts of interest, so on and so forth. And the entire code is outlined in the city code under 2.60, which reads in more detail, much more detail than the statement that you actually signed. So, Andrea, next slide, please. So in January, at the January 19 meeting, as a result of two ethics complaints that were brought forward to the City Council in 2020, or excuse me, 2020? Yeah, 2020. I'm sorry, COVID confuses things. I lose track of my years. At any rate, as a result of two complaints that were brought forward, we discovered that there's probably some places for improvement within the code as well as our statement. So council provides some additional direction to staff, one of which was to follow up with each of the boards and commissions and have this very conversation that we're having. Again, it's a very abbreviated conversation, lots more to come, but it's about communicating more effectively with our boards and commissions about the council's direction. So, and you know, this, it comes back to, I think all of you, if you were able to read it, we sent out an email to all of you regarding the ability to seek an informal opinion from the city attorney regarding how to apply the Code of Ethics. So when in doubt, basically, when in doubt, contact the city attorney. And in the meantime, until such time that we have an opportunity to fully vet the current Code of Ethics and make some changes. That's kind of our directive or encouragement to you. And we're looking to come back to you in April. That might be a little bit of an aggressive timeline. We might have to push over into May, but we're looking to come back to you with a revised Code of Ethics for all of the boards and commissions, some more extensive training than what we're talking about tonight. So next slide, Andrea. Again, to elaborate on the city attorney and the informal opinions, it's about hypothetical circumstances. An example would be with the previous city that I worked for, I coordinated and orchestrated a lot of community events. And it was not uncommon for me to receive a basket of, whether it's chocolates or fruit or hickory farms, whatever the case may be, as a thank you. I did not, while I accepted it graciously and sent them a thank you note, it wasn't something that I kept and took home to my family. I promptly took it out to the front counter. I sent out an email letting everybody know that it was available. But it wasn't about Devastrata, you know, taking in a gift type thing. So when in doubt, please go ahead and contact the city attorney. Now we will say that there is a bit of a difference between seeking an informal opinion from the city attorney versus an inquiry to the city's ethics officer for an advisory opinion. The two are a bit different. I will tell you as your city clerk and a trained public records officer, because we cannot guarantee that your emails are attorney-client privilege, my recommendation to anybody is pick up the phone and make a call. And that's just the safest, you know, way to go about making sure that your communication is not shared in such a way that you don't want it to be shared. So the next slide there, Andrea. Basically, the next steps is going to be like we talked about, we're going to be reviewing it. We are researching other communities. We feel like we're pretty on board with what other communities are doing, but we're doing a deeper dive. We are open to your comments and suggestions. You are the ones that deal with this regularly. I know that your chairman, Mr. Hubble, has a lot of experience in this arena in Newcastle and has had some thoughtful suggestions or ideas. We encourage you to reach out to Ali Speets, our Chief of Administration, and share those ideas. Or you can send them to Andrea and she can forward them along, whatever you want to do. In the meantime, we'll be discussing with this with the City Council, and we're looking to bring back to them something to consider in March so that we can begin a training process in April. We are also working with contracting with an outside counsel to do the training. We really feel like this is a situation where we want to separate city staff from the training process, bring in somebody who doesn't have the personal involvement, who can be as neutral as possible in the situation and provide you the best training. So like I said before, we anticipate that'll happen no later than April 2021, but there may be some spillover to May. So with that, that's really all that I have. I'm happy to answer any questions to the extent that I can, or punt them to somebody else. So.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. I appreciate the update, and I will open this to questions to everybody. I want to avoid too much discussion
Certainly.
and dialogue around this. So certainly if you have thoughts and any opinions that you would like to share related to this, I suggest that you send them to Ali, as was suggested in the presentation. I want to highlight one thing that I think in the presentation that's worth noting, that Deb alluded to. We all signed a form, I think it was 2 years ago in 2018, that had a number of bullet points that I think was re-forwarded to us about a month ago when this issue was brought forward. And I would say that is important, but it is also important to go and look at the code, specifically at the citation. I think it was 2.60, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So I would go and look at the actual code, because there's actually a lot more depth and detail there that is not at all in the contract that we were asked to sign. And I think it would be, again, I don't want to have discussion or dialogue around the content of it, but I think it is valuable for every member to go and read that and be familiar with it, because that is what the council will be reviewing. And there's a bunch of stuff that's deeper in there beyond what was on the documents that we had agreed to earlier. So I would suggest do that, familiarize yourself, and submit your comments to Ali. But if you do have questions, we do have the city clerk here. So if anybody has a question that they'd like answered, I'd be happy to take those. Commissioner Boatsman. And you're on mute still. Carolyn, you're on mute.
I will
There you
probably
go.
not use my hand signal because even I can't see it up there in the far left against my yellow background. So anyway, two things I wanted to ask. I wanted to confirm, it sounds like the Planning Commission does not have input to the actual wording of the ordinance changes. Am I correct in that?
Well, you are encouraged to make your suggestions, but obviously it's a legislative decision that takes place at the council level, and it's adopted by them. So while you contribute, it's not something that's adopted at the Border Commission level.
Okay. I guess I only had, both my questions were essentially the same thing. So I think that answers it. Thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Mitchum?
So my question is just quickly, Deb, could you clarify for us again where we can see draft versions of this so that we can give feedback?
Certainly. So draft versions have not been written yet. what I would encourage you to do is look at City Code 2.60 as written.
Okay.
As
And then
well
we
as-
can suggestions
yeah,
based on
as
that.
well as, yeah, in addition, look at your code of ethics statement. And in response to what Chairman Hubble shared earlier, there is council and staff recognize that there is, shall we say, some inconsistencies between the statement and the city code itself in 2.60. And so that's one of the things we're looking to remedy going forward. But look at that. We will be looking to other cities. We'll be looking to an organization known as Municipal Research and Services Center, mrsc.org, for code of ethics statements. Some cities have what they call a code of conduct. I know that in my professional organization, we have a code of conduct that we follow. So yeah, if you have, regardless of what your feedback is, if you just want to take a version of the code, which if you go to our municipal code, you can pull it as a Word document and go in and create track changes and send it to us like that, please, by all means. We're open to all of that. And quite honestly, as a city clerk, you would make me very happy if you took a Word document and did track changes. That is much easier for us to follow. So.
Great. Commissioner Murphy, did
Does
you have
that
a
answer your
question?
question?
Yeah, I do.
Go ahead, Commissioner Murphy.
Thanks, Dan. Do we know who's actually drafting the new code?
To be honest, it won't be one person. As with any agenda, bill, or ordinance, there are usually many, many hands on it. There will be a combination of staff involved. Our city attorney will be involved, as well as our outside legal counsel will probably be involved. So this is usually a melting pot of many minds to come up with the best option in the end. At least that we present. It may not be the final product, but you know. And it's highly probable, given that this is an ordinance, I would not be surprised if this takes 2 or 3 readings. This is inevitably, given the history of the last year, going to be something that's going to be wordsmithed a little bit in order to hopefully arrive at the best place possible on it.
Great. Are there any other questions? Well, thank you very much, Deb. We appreciate you coming to take the time and present this. And we look forward to both submitting, for those of you interested, we look forward to submitting feedback, and we'll look forward to the conclusion of this once it comes back to us later this spring.
Definitely. And what I would just share is that if at the end of all this, you don't remember who you need to send it to, if you send it to Andrea, Andrea's going to make sure we get it. Or if you send it to me, it'll, you know, it's going to come across my desk regardless, but Andrea will know where to get it. So, okay. Thanks again, Andrea, for being such a rock star.
Thank you,
Thank
Deb,
you
for
very
joining us.
much.
Have a
All
great
right,
rest
y'all.
of your night.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Now I have to get back to my agenda. And we are regular business agenda item 6. So this will be the discussion of CPA 21-001 related to the land use plan map and the comprehensive plan amendment there coinciding. I will mention the three items that we have here related to the plan amendments that we first brought up last week. We originally, I think, as you recall, we're going to have and Allison will talk about this at the end, but we were going to have our wireless code, I think, first reading this week. And just due to some timing for some information, we're actually going to move that to next week. And so, or to the next meeting next month. So the goal here this evening is to, I think, as Allison will walk us through, is get review the deliberation of recommendations. And I believe, Allison, are you looking for us to take a vote this evening?
Yeah, if you guys are ready, we would like you to take a vote and make your formal recommendation tonight, and then we can begin transmitting that to council next month.
Great. So I just wanted to set the stage for everyone to know ahead of time that this is the purpose of this is to actually get a vote and approve or disapprove. I think based on the conversation that we had last month, that shouldn't be too difficult. But we never know how these meetings will go. So with that, Allison, do you want to take us through item number 1?
Yeah, and I'm just going to keep this pretty brief since we talked about each of these last month, and I think we probably covered most of your questions. There's not a lot changing, but if you do have questions or comments, feel free to jump in. Okay, so just first up, these are the criteria for reviewing comprehensive plan amendments. First, it needs to be consistent with the Growth Management Act and countywide planning policies. And 1A, if there's any obvious technical errors contained in the comprehensive plan, that is a reason for making an amendment, which is probably the most applicable of these criteria since we are seeking to correct an error that was previously made in the comp plan. And then number 2, if it is related to a specific property, which this is, the following should be determined. Is it compatible with the adjacent land use? Is it suitable for development in conformance with the standards under the zoning? And will it benefit the community as a whole? So just keep that in mind, I guess, as the criteria for evaluating this. Okay. So as I said, this amendment is related to a staff error back in 2018 that misidentified the South End Shopping Center as commercial office, and this amendment will redesignate it as neighborhood business. Staff recommend approving the proposed amendment. And once again, this map is the same as what we looked at last month. And you can see in this proposed version, this area appears commercial office in lighter yellow, and it adds neighborhood business down here in the sort of ochre color, and differentiates those as 2 different designations. So that's the change. Yeah, so that's my last slide on this item. If there's any questions or discussion, we can jump into that.
Great. I think we've been through this a few times. Are there any questions first for Allison? And if not, I'm happy to take any start by asking for a motion, and then we can have deliberation. Commissioner Boatsman?
Yeah. It looks to me like the color of the neighborhood business zone we're talking about is exactly the same on the 2 maps. Am I mistaken? It's down near the south end, right?
Yeah, you're right that it is the same color, but you'll notice that on the proposed map, it's hard to tell the difference. This one's actually a bit lighter or brighter.
Yes.
Okay. So, the commercial office and the
Okay.
neighborhood business are slightly different colors.
Okay. I think I get what you're doing now with the map. Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
It's almost like the key needed to be updated more than
They
anything
had to
else.
add the neighborhood business back in, and just the way our GIS person did the colors, she kept the color down here the same and added the lighter color up here.
Great. Okay, Commissioner Mitchum. Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, sorry, I thought pressing the space bar would unmute me. Seems to work sometimes and not every time. Okay, I was going to propose a motion. Basically, I move that we accept this change in the land use map, and I move that we accept that change.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the change to the land use map. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Mitchum and seconded by Commissioner Goodman. Do we have any comments or deliberation? Commissioner Goodman.
Well, I was going to say I had the same problem that Commissioner Boatsman had, and I looked at the map several times before I could, differentiate it. So I don't know if there is any flexibility in the final printed map, but perhaps it would be good to provide a little more differentiation between commercial office and neighborhood business in terms of the color and pattern used.
That's certainly possible, and I'd be happy to incorporate that if the commission agrees on that change. We can include that in the recommendation that goes to council.
Yeah, maybe triangles.
Polka dot, something.
Any other comments or deliberation? Commissioner Weinberg.
Yes, I had a question. So the two zoning or the two land uses that got confused, where it was accidentally marked as a commercial office, did they have the same maximum height?
I don't believe they do. I think they have different zoning and, different land use regulations. I don't know the specifics of what the height limits are for each of those zones, but I believe the commercial office, which is the area just to the east of City Hall, I believe that does allow taller buildings than what's at the South End Shopping Center, but I don't know the details.
Is there a way that you could show us how to look that up? So that we could see what the zone allows? Because I think when I was doing my research, it looked like they had the exact same 36-foot height limit, and I think the two land uses actually had like one of them had multiple zoning codes underneath it. But when I looked at both of those zoning codes, they both said 36 feet as well.
Okay.
I'm just curious because there seems to have been some confusion out there about whether the Scrivener's error accidentally allowed a taller building.
Yeah, no, it does not change the underlying zoning of either of these areas. It literally, all it does is change this designation on the map. So the zoning is contained in the city code. Maybe the easiest way would be for me to send you guys links to the two sections after the meeting. I don't have it at my fingertips at the moment.
Yeah, I think the point that you made there, Allison, is a good one to reinforce, which is the land use designation is more of the strategic map that we have, and the actual rule that governs what can be done is the zone that's designated as a part of the code, and that never was that was always correct and has been correct to my understanding, and so therefore the zone and the rules that governed and regulated the property never changed. It was really more of the strategic document in the comprehensive plan that was just reflecting sort of the wrong longer term strategic land use. But it doesn't have any direct impact on the day-to-day interpretation. If a plan had come forward in the last month or the last year, whenever this change happened, it actually wouldn't have had any impact on what could or couldn't have been developed, correct?
That's correct. Each of the designations shown in this comprehensive plan have a corresponding zone, which has a slightly different name. Like, I think commercial office is the business zone and neighborhood business is the PBZ zone. And each of those has a set of land use regulations that have not changed. They've been very consistent over the years.
Okay, thank you.
The 19.04-040 is the PBZ zone, and 19-04-020 is the commercial office code.
Great, thank you. Okay, were there any other comments or deliberation on this before we take a vote? All right, hearing none. Andrea, are we doing this by roll call?
Please, Chair.
Great. So with that, would the senior administrator please take a roll call vote on approval of CPA 21-001 related to updating the land use plan map.
Commissioner Goodman? Commissioner
Aye.
Murphy? Vice Chair Mitchum? Was that aye, Jenny?
Aye.
Chair
Aye.
Hubble? Commissioner
Aye.
Boatsman? And
Aye.
Commissioner Weinberg? Motion passes 6-0.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to item 7, ZTR 21-001, affectionately referred to as a Goldbach 1 code amendment in your packet. Allison, go ahead.
Okay, I'll go over this once, but it applies to the next two amendments since they're both code amendments. These are the review criteria. It needs to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. It needs to bear a substantial relation to public health, safety, and welfare. And the amendment needs to be in the best interest of the community as a whole. All right. So Goldbach 1 is the proposed amendment to repeal MICC 1915-230I, and it removes the direction on comprehensive plan amendment implementation. And instead, this would be governed by state statute. So there are existing, growth management regulations around this that would govern the process. And staff recommends approving the proposed amendment. And this is actually the section that would be repealed. Are there any questions about this?
Okay. Hearing no questions, is there a motion to approve the amendment as presented? Commissioner Boatsman.
I move that we approve Goldbach 1 code amendment.
Second.
Okay, approval of ZTR 21-001 has been moved by Commissioner Boatsman and seconded by Commissioner Weinberg. Is there any discussion or deliberation? All right, hearing none. Andrea, would you like to take a roll call vote, please, on approval of ZTR 21-001?
Yes, Chair. Commissioner Weinberg?
Aye.
Threw you off by calling you first. Chair Hubble?
Aye.
Commissioner Boatsman? Commissioner
Aye.
Murphy? Vice Chair Mitchum?
Aye.
And Commissioner Goodman?
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes 6-0.
I think that may have set the record for the quickest that we've ever gotten through an agenda item in the history of the Planning Commission. All right, with that, we'll move to item number 8, ZTR 21-001, affectionately referred to as Goldbach 2, related to conditional use permit applicability. Allison.
Okay, so this one has the same review criteria as the one we just went over. So it needs to be consistent with the comp plan, needs to advance health, safety, and welfare, and benefit the community as a whole. Okay, so Goldbach 2, it adds some clarity on the applicability of the conditional use permits. And as we discussed last time in the commission directed staff, we've further revised and edited this amendment. I worked on that with the city attorney, and I'll show you that in a second. And the staff recommendation is to approve the revised amendment. So here it is. This whole section C, applicability, is the proposed addition to the code, and what's redlined here is the changes since you reviewed this last month. And our intent was to provide a little more clarity and definition around the word property. So we've added this sentence referring to the legal description of the property boundaries that's submitted with the permit application. And then there was a little further editing here just to be a little more clear that, you know, the CUP only applies to those original boundaries, even if the property is subsequently enlarged by a boundary line adjustment or purchasing additional land adjacent, the CUP would still only apply to those original boundaries. So just trying to give some clarity in the language there. And this is what the city attorney and I came up with. So with that, I'll just open it up for questions, or if you have any comments or feedback about the specific wording here, now would be the time to discuss that.
Thank you, Allison. I see, is there anybody that has any questions or questions first, and then we'll I'll ask for a motion if there's no questions. Okay. With that, then is there a motion to approve what is it, ZTR 21-002 as presented?
Chair, we had a hand from Commissioner Weinberg.
Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to say that I believe that this does well capture the intent of the submitted amendments. So good job on getting the wording, and with the addition of the even if the boundaries clause at the end there. I think that does a good job of it.
Thank you.
Any questions before we call for a motion again? Commissioner Mitchum, I saw you had your hand. Go ahead.
Yes, I do have a question, or maybe I should hold this for after the motion is made. It's more of a wording suggestion.
Yeah, let's get a motion then if we want to make some wording deliberation around the wording. So is there a motion to approve ZTR 21-002 as presented?
Yeah, so moved.
Second.
Is there a second? Okay, moved by Commissioner Weinberg, seconded by Commissioner Boatsman. Jenny, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, I actually had to read this twice before I really understood what was being said here, despite us having discussed it. So I think I would like to suggest a slight wording change to clarify the meaning. So it says, as defined by the legal description of the property boundaries submitted with the conditional use permit application. The use permitted, blah, 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 shall be permissible only within the boundaries of the legal description submitted with the permit application. I would add the word original in both of those sentences. So as described by the legal description of the property boundaries submitted with the original conditional use permit application. And then the usage permitted shall be permitted only within the original boundaries of the legal description submitted, even if the boundaries have subsequently been enlarged. I also might suggest that rather than enlarged, that will leave it, that may lead to confusion if the boundaries have been changed, but the overall area of the lot has remained constant. So I would say if the boundaries of the property are subsequently changed rather than enlarged. And if there's a good reason that it's stated one way and not the other, I'm happy to hear that. These are just suggestions for making it a little more clear.
I would accept that as a friendly amendment if the person who seconds it is also interested.
I will second that. Those are good changes.
Okay. It was offered as a friendly amendment just to add the language original to the, I believe it was to property boundaries. Allison, do you have any comments on that? And then secondly, we'll get to the enlarged versus changed.
I think it was, so the wording I have was submitted with the original conditional use permit application. And I think that is fine. That just clarifies the meaning a bit more. And when we're talking about, you know, expanding the boundaries or something, there could be future further applications. So it helps to clarify that we're talking about that initial original CUP application.
So actually, this would be a substantive question, because if there were, let's say there's a first application for a conditional use, for a conditional use permit, and that is granted, and the organization uses that, and then a few years later, they submit another change, and the boundary lines have not changed, but it's a slightly different, it's a modification, and that is approved. Then they go along and they do something different. Then I guess the question is, are they resubmitting a full application each time? Is it now, it's that second application, does that supersede the first one? Or is it possible to have kind of several conditional use permits for slightly different things within one property? Or does
Yeah,
the new one completely supersede a previous one?
so that's the situation we have now, like with the JCC, like we talked about last month. There, for that property, I'm aware there are 2 or 3 different CUPs that have sort of layered on top of each other. They do not supersede or replace the previous CUP, they just add to it. And so I think going forward, that's something that we've talked about internally, like an administrative sort of procedural change we'd like to make is if there's a new CUP for the same boundaries, it should repeal the old stuff and then carry forward any provisions that we intend to carry forward so that it's clear all of the conditions and requirements are clearly stated in the most recent CUP, and we don't need to research 50 years of ancient history to figure out all of the different layers of what's required. So yeah, we do have a situation where they can kind of lay over each other. And so the one thing with this wording that's maybe concerning me slightly now that we've talked about this is if we say original, I wonder if that'll get confusing if there's more than one CUP application for a property.
That's actually what I was thinking about, because let me just sort of throw out a hypothetical for us to discuss. So, I'll just use the JCC because I'm familiar with the property. So, they get a conditional use permit for a community center, and then they decide hypothetically they're going to add a tennis. They bought a small parcel of land, so it's a little bigger than it was the first time, and they're adding a tennis court. So then they realize they need to get a new conditional use permit to add that particular usage, the sort of athletic facility usage, and that's approved. And then some number of years later, they decide they want to change the lighting or something, and now you've got 2 prior, and so that needs a new conditional use permit, and you've got the 2 that were approved for slightly different footprints. So the question is kind of how does that get reviewed? Does it, and again, assuming here that the third one is a request for a change that affects both the original and the expanded parcel that were approved at different times. So that's my concern, is that that's not clear as to what that is and what the process is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think our code really contemplates or addresses how over time CUPs could be sort of layered, or as properties grow, you might have a CUP on parcel A, and then later you'd have the CUP that covers both parcel A and parcel B. That's basically silent in the code right now. And so, we need to figure out administratively how we're gonna track and manage and enforce those different layers, which has been some of the complication in the last year or two regarding the JCC property. I imagine the same thing could probably happen with some of the other properties that have CUPs, because often they've been there for decades and probably have had more than one CUP process.
And I know there's a couple of questions. I think Ted has a question, and Commissioner Murphy, did you have a question as well? And
I
then
do.
Carolyn, And I just wanted to say, before I get to that, Allison, did we not, coming out of the JCC, identify when we were doing that whole the facility zone? Isn't that something that we had identified as a work item potentially for the future, is actually reviewing the CUP ordinance itself and like redoing that whole thing? We're just not undertaking that currently.
Yeah, that's not currently on our work plan, but it's definitely an area that could use improvement.
Yeah. Let me start with Commissioner Murphy. I saw you were first, and then Ted, and then Carolyn.
So I have a couple of comments, and I'm sorry I missed the last meeting, but I did watch the video and heard everybody's comments. And I have a more basic concern about this amendment. And the code change is really not necessary if you're trying to deal with the issue of somebody trying to expand a CUP by virtue of, say, a boundary line adjustment or purchase of additional property. In the most basic sense, the CUP only attaches to the property that is the subject of the CUP. Now, it doesn't mean, to address Jenny's questions, it doesn't mean you can't layer CUPs, because there's nothing in the code that would prohibit that, and there was no reason why you wouldn't prohibit it. Now, if you have conflicting CUPs, I suppose it's possible that would have to be dealt with in the hearing process for the subsequent CUPs. But this is strikes me as a solution in search of a problem, and I'm not sure. And it concerns me that, this is brought forth by an individual that may or may not have a specific agenda that is not entirely clear. And I'm not sure if I'm comfortable recommending code changes to satisfy a really an unspecified and potentially individualized agenda for something that is not broke and doesn't need fixing by any objective standard in terms of examples. And so I have a real fundamental concern with tinkering with this because I don't think it's necessary. The other problem, and I do think, given the comments last time, that Allison, you've done a really good job of trying to deal with the issue has presented, but the language really has, in my mind, a potentially unintended consequence. And that is, the way it's drafted, if someone opposed the, say the JCC or any group acquired some adjoining property and wanted to include that under the CUP, then they would have to apply for a CUP for that property. But as drafted, this could be read to prohibit the expansion of the conditional use the way it's drafted. And I think that's certainly not what was intended by the draft, but I can see that somebody could use the language to make that argument. And I think, when you're talking about an issue where we've got a solution in search of a problem, or a problem that is in someone's mind that's not disclosed, and we're trying to draft to that, I'm really concerned about doing that kind of modification.
Commissioner Weinberg.
I didn't have a question, but I was listening carefully to what Commissioner Murphy was just saying, and I'm looking at the sentence that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines up from the bottom, which I think is the core of his very valid concern that he just raised. It says the uses permitted under a conditional use permit shall be permissible only within the boundaries of the legal description submitted with the permit application, even if the boundaries are subsequently enlarged. So I think the concern that you're raising, if I'm understanding you correctly, Commissioner Murphy, is that that could be misinterpreted as saying that no future cup can be allowed that would, or could be applied for that would allow that use outside of the original boundary. Essentially, it means all the property around it suddenly can't use that ever. Which I agree would be not the intent, or at least I didn't understand that to be the intent. But it looks like there is a risk of it that being misinterpreted that way.
Correct.
Commissioner Boatsman, you were next.
Well, I've been listening sympathetically to Commissioner Murphy about the possibility of something not being broke, being fixed potentially, but maybe not being fixed. I was thinking when I was considering that I had seconded the motion to a friendly amendment, but I'm thinking that maybe I would withdraw that second, but because it seems to me that it's more flexible to not insert the terms, the original property boundaries, the original conditions and so on. Because I picture that there could be over many years conditional use permits that apply to various pieces of property that overlap. And I don't understand or think that one conditional use permit would invalidate the other one. It would seem that if the use that was allowed under a certain piece of property, if that's the part of the property in year 2021 that they're doing what was approved on, that should still be okay. And if they have another conditional use permit that says they can do something about the lighting in a certain property area, it would seem to me that that's independent from the previous approval. I also think that, you know, I've always been dubious that this needed to be changed at all, but I would think that the way that the staff have revised it is probably safer than making any further changes. Although I'm still a little bit confused about the second sentence. So I'll leave it at that. Not particularly clear, but I'm still trying to understand what this means. Thank you.
Ted, I see you. I want to make a comment first, if you don't mind. Allison, so my understanding of sort of the original problem as Commissioner Murphy stated it was, or at least the way that it was presented, I think by Mr. Goldbach, is that the idea is that if you have a permit on a property, you add a piece of property to it, that new property cannot assume the benefits of the previous conditional use permit. However, the idea is that in order for that new property to be sort of granted those things, it has to go through the process of requesting a conditional use permit, which includes public notification and likely public hearings, and like there's a public process involved with it, right? And so the idea that, as I understood this phrase for item C here, is that essentially it says no additional property can consume the benefits of a previous permit without going through the process, through the public process. And they may be granted those rights after having gone through the process, but they don't tacitly receive them. And that's the way that the code is currently being, or the administrative procedure is currently being dealt with by the staff. and that this language was meant only to essentially codify what is already sort of procedurally known from an administrative perspective. Is all of that correct?
That does sound correct. I talked to Mr. Goldbach yesterday. He called me and it sounded like, really his intent with this was to ensure that if an adjacent property was purchased by the CUP property owner, they would need to go through the full CUP process in order to get additional uses granted to the property that weren't allowed by the zoning. And so they would need the public outreach and, the process. That was really what he wanted to make sure was happening. And like you just said, Chair Hubble, that is the current procedure already, but this does codify it and make it more clear right in the code that that is what is expected.
So is it your belief that the language that you and the city attorney presented this evening fulfills that, I wanted to say directive, but it's not a directive, but that intent?
I do believe it fulfills that intent. And I think it's a little confusing in layman's term when it says the use is permitted under the conditional use permit, but essentially what that means is if you think of the JCC as an example, a portion of that property is in a residential zone. And so the use of having a community center or a recreation facility is not allowed by right in that zone. It's allowed through the conditional use permit process. So in order to have that kind of facility in a residential zone, you need to go through this special approval process. And so to be able to do that kind of a use, like a recreation facility on an adjacent residential property, we're saying, you'd have to go through that whole process again because we don't allow the use of recreation facility in a single family residential zone. So right now, the JCC, they have their CUP for their existing facility, but they have purchased at some point an adjacent residential property. As well, the French American School has purchased several adjacent residential properties. And so right now, they cannot pursue any uses on those properties that aren't already allowed in the residential zoning. Right now they have houses on them and they're leased out and that's how they're being used. But, if the JCC wanted to start using them as a tennis court, like someone suggested earlier, then they would have to go through the whole CUP process to see if the city would approve a recreation facility on that residential property. So I think this language, it just is trying to say that those special conditional uses are only allowed in those original boundaries for the CUP application.
But it doesn't prohibit further, it doesn't, the further going through the process for additional.
Right. It doesn't prohibit a future CUP for a different property boundary.
Great. Commissioner Boatsman and then Commissioner Murphy, and then Ted, did you also have a question or no? I think I cut you off originally, so.
Not at the moment, go ahead.
Commissioner Boatsman.
So I want to confirm with Allison that staff's current view and the way this is administratively handled now is that if the property lines of a piece of property are changed, it's made larger, it's made smaller, it's the same size, but it bumps out in a different direction, the CUP that is on that piece of property expires and is no longer applicable. Is that correct?
No, the CUP would still exist. It would just still only apply to the original property boundary. So
well, then what
prior
if
to the boundary adjustments or addition of parcels or whatever happens?
So what if I add another piece of parcel to my parcel, or the applicant adds another piece of property to the parcel, making it larger, for example, but the CUP, whatever it allowed, still stays within the original part of the property for which the CUP was approved. Why should that not be okay? And if they come in with another CUP for addressing the part of the property that has been added, and that's something different, like lighting or a tennis court or something. Couldn't those two just overlap? And I'm just,
Yeah, like if, you know, you've got a community club facility and they have a certain property that they've owned for 50 years, and now they purchase a couple of residential homes that are next door, and they decide, you know, okay, we've had our pool and our, you know, gym and everything all this time, but now we want to add mini golf. We're going to go do a CUP for the two new properties and say, can we do mini golf on these properties? You know, we could do a CUP just for those two properties, or we could do a new CUP that covers the original parcel plus the two new properties. It would be up to them to apply for whatever flavor of CUP they wanted to pursue, and then the city would need to go through the public process and evaluate what's being proposed and make a decision.
Commissioner Murphy, you were next, and then Jenny.
So I think Allison correctly described what is intended and what the goal is. My concern is not with that. My concern is with the language that Ted pointed out, and that is that an unintended consequence of this is that someone could argue that expansion of a conditional use to adjoining property is simply prohibited. And I think if we're going to address this and try to satisfy the requested amendment, we need to draft it in such a way that it makes it clear that that's not the case, and that the original CUPs or CUP can be amended or modified, unless that original one is amended or modified to include the additional property, or a new CUP is approved, granted for the property as enlarged. My concern is just making sure that somewhere down the road, someone doesn't take that language that doesn't mean that and argues that it does mean that it prohibits that use in the adjoining properties.
Jenny? Oh, you're still on mute.
Okay, I actually had a similar thought or concern about this. So let me throw another hypothetical out. You've got a private school or a church school that has an athletic field, and they have a CUP for that. And then they purchase another property next to it, and they're going to use it for more athletic fields. The exact same use, the exact same type of CUP, but they need to put in a new CUP or a new request for that new parcel. And they can either, I'm just going to clarify this, they can either do that by applying for a new CUP that applies, that will cover only the new parcel, or they can go back and say, hey, we would like to amend our existing CUP to expand it to the new property. So no matter what, a new parcel or a new property adjacent to an existing one is still going to have to go through the CUP application process. Is that correct, right? Okay, so given that, I am tending to agree a little more with Commissioner Murphy, which is that I think if we wanted to clarify this, that the clarification might go along the lines of a conditional use permit shall apply to the property for which it was granted, and subsequent parcels, you know, additions or something like that, subsequent additions or changes to the lot line must either have a new CUP or the original CUP must be revised to include that. I think a statement like that may be more clear. It gets at what we want to say, and it doesn't necessarily have, and it doesn't lead itself to this kind of potential misinterpretation. And I realize that this may mean sending you back to the drawing board for rewriting it, but I do think that Commissioner Murphy's concern with it is valid.
If I could offer, actually, Jenny, the language is right there in the sentence that's struck out, right? So I think it requires a little bit of changes to the beginning of it. But if you end this with the additional language, even if the boundaries of the property are subsequently changed, period. Changes,
Okay.
and then basically just add something to the front of shall require new conditional use permit applications, you know, and be subject to chapter blah blah blah, right? Like the language is there.
I think in that, where that crossed out section is, we could say something along the lines of expansion of conditional uses to adjoining properties shall require a new conditional use permit application.
Well, I would actually, I like Jenny's original suggestion. I would just say changes to the original property boundaries would, you know, or yeah, change to, you know, a change to the permitted, you know, boundaries will require a new conditional use permit. I mean, that's basically it, right? Like changes to the boundary require a new permit, period.
I think so. Can I interject? I think that if we're going to keep the suggested new language, then yes, I think that clarification of putting in original is helpful. But I think maybe we don't want to strike that last sentence. We either want to keep that or reword it slightly, because
that was my suggestion.
I'm sorry?
That was my suggestion.
That was your suggestion. Okay, good. Sorry, I missed that.
Commissioner Boatsman.
Yeah, I agree with Dan. I also think that in any changes we make to this, the terms property and property boundaries are pretty much the same thing. I don't see this, I don't see a need to kind of continually talk about property boundaries being changed. I mean, piece of property is a thing that has boundaries. So, and the other thing is, an applicant might have a conditional use permit approved for a piece of property and might expand that property and then use it for a greenbelt buffer. You know, that might not require a, you know, change in the CUP. So
Well,
anyway,
if it's a permitted
the
use,
most flexible way that this can be worded would be the most favorable.
in the case, Carolyn, I think of a permitted use, like a green belt would be permitted in a residential area because it's undeveloped. Therefore, you wouldn't need a conditional use permit.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
thank you.
Who did I see next? Commissioner Goodman. Did I see you trying to say something, and we haven't heard from you?
Not especially, but I guess just so everyone knows what I'm thinking, my first preference would be not to make a change at all. I think that this isn't really a necessary amendment. That being said, if the commission in general does want to change something, or if there's concern that the council down the road will want some language to look at, you know, I agree with generally the ideas and concerns that have been identified. I'm not sure it makes sense to wordsmith it on the spot tonight. I'm kind of worried that we might end up with something that hasn't been thought through well enough. So those are, you know, my first preference is probably just not to recommend forwarding it, but with the sort of realization that there might be interest in the community of having this kind of amendment to maybe send it back to the city attorney with our concerns and see if we can come back with something, or they can come back with something.
I hear Evan in my head saying anytime we can provide clarity to the staff on how they should interpret administrative policy is always a positive thing. So I get both sides of the coin there. Allison, how much trouble is it, because I saw a couple of head nods to Commissioner Goodman's suggestion about maybe, again, having the city attorney look at this to tighten up that language at the end. I think there have been a number of, I think, valid questions around some of this, and I do think that it is a substantive enough, it potentially has a substantive enough impact that it might warrant a review again. Is that going to cause too much trouble, or if we table the motion to the next meeting?
Yeah, I think it's okay for us to bring this back one more time. I'm assuming that would be a fairly brief discussion. If just gives us a chance to redraft this a little. You guys can look at it one more time and then vote on the final language.
Does that require us to reopen the public hearing portion of this, since the language may change?
I don't think it requires you to. You could choose to do that, to either reopen it or continue the public hearing. I think if we're just talking about some wordsmithing and kind of one sentence here, we wouldn't necessarily have to do that because it's not a major change.
I mean, that would be my interpretation, which is I don't think there's any substantive, like what we're talking about, I don't think is substantive, other than it's just making sure that we're laying out the intent. We wouldn't need to do that, but I'm not the I'm not the scholar on that, so which is the question. I'll leave it to you. If you're comfortable, and if it's the will of the commission, and maybe I'll just sort of look across, like, given the conversation that we've had, is this something that the maker of the motion and the seconder would be willing to table this to the next meeting for just further review?
Yeah, if we can provide guidance to the staff that we would like to have them come back with a version that prevents the unintended prohibition of any future change to the property, or any future application of additional CUPs. I'm thinking that would address Commissioner Murphy's concern, but I should probably ask him.
That does.
Okay.
And I'd be happy, I've toyed with some language to graft onto what's been done already, and I'd be happy to contribute that to Allison to expedite the
you're
process.
welcome to email me something after the meeting. And I can always share that with the whole commission, as well as, I'll take the suggestions to the city attorney and talk through a redraft with him.
Okay.
Jenny.
I just wanted to point out, I think the reason that we originally decided we did not want to take up this amendment, among other amendments, was that it would take a great deal of time at a point where staff resources are severely strained, and we have a great deal less staff support and a great deal less ability to take up a whole bunch of amendments and spend the amount of time needed to really deal with them properly. So I just wanted to point out that prediction is coming true with this, which looks like a fairly simple thing, but it's not. So, I mean, one thing is that we could simply say no, we can recommend no and vote down on the amendment, and and that would be our recommendation to council. Or we can go on and take the time and do the wordsmithing and all of this stuff. At this point, I might be comfortable doing either one. I am a little nervous about embarking on a whole other process that then may require, it requires more back and forth with staff and commission, possibly if we made big enough changes, it sounds like we might need another public hearing. I mean, on and on. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up and sort of say I told you so.
So Jenny, we all voted in that direction, and the decision was made by the council that we were going to put the effort into it, and they have committed the staff resources to do it. My job as the chair is to lead us through the process of doing that fully and thoroughly and coming to the correct decision. And given the virtual nature, if we were in and we could, I guess, do this, but BO is not here. If we were in person, BO would likely be here. We could take a 10 to 15 minute recess and have them go and quickly draft something and come back. And because we don't have that same luxury virtually, I'm inclined to just say this is probably a 5 to 10 minute meeting between Allison and BO, I hope. I think that it's 95% of the way to where we need to be, and I would rather do it right than do it hastily and improperly. So I just want to give it justice. And while I agree with you in principle, those were my comments at the beginning of this process. The council has directed us otherwise, and so I think we're at this point sort of chartered to do the right thing and I think do our diligence. So unless you have a strenuous objection, Allison, and do think that it's going to be an overtly big lift for staff to just take another quick look at this, I'm inclined to ask if we can table it. Is that a fair assessment, Allison?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be incredibly time consuming to make this final revision. I mean, obviously it would be less time consuming to just approve something or not tonight, but it's manageable and we can get it done.
You need
And my understanding is that even if we were to approve these tonight, they wouldn't be going in front of the council until we have all of these done at the end of the fall, correct?
That's the case for the comprehensive plan amendment, but for the code amendments, they will be going to council as we complete them throughout the year. So this one is currently scheduled to go in April. So I think even if we talk about it in March, I should still be able to make that happen.
Great. So I think, Ted, you were the maker of the motion. Are you, do we need a motion? Maybe whoever is our parliamentarian here, I don't know if that's Andrea or someone else. Do we need a motion to table this?
I think we do, but I'm willing to make that motion as well.
Okay, so moved. Is there a second?
Second.
So it's been moved by Commissioner Weinberg and seconded by Commissioner Murphy to table discussion to our next regular meeting in March. Do you need a roll call vote, or can we just say aye or nay, Andrea?
We can do a visual raise of hands.
Visual raise of hands. Great. All those in favor of tabling the motion, please raise your hands. Any
Motion
opposed?
We
passes
should
6 to
also
0.
verbally say aye because the raised hands are not visible for people listening in.
Oh, there you go.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So
If it's
just
by
a quick
accident,
eye from everybody.
Aye.
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 Great. So we'll bring this back as at a vote of 6 to 0 for our next meeting. Thank you, Allison. I know it just adds a little bit of time, but I am hoping that just given the conversation that we should move through this rather quickly next time.
Yeah, and I think the drafting we're close. It's just a matter of wordsmithing things and getting the final legal opinion on what this all means.
Great. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I think that was a good discussion. Let's go ahead and move to item number 9, which is an update on the wireless code. Allison.
Okay, so just before I move on to that, one quick recap on the process from here. So for the two amendments that were approved tonight, the comprehensive plan land use map and the Goldbach one, those will be transmitted to council. I'll be preparing a written summary of the commission's recommendation, which will be signed by Chair Hubble. And then the chair will also have the option to address the council when these do go to council for the first reading. Like I said, we're anticipating that happening in April. I think even if the third one does get delayed, like I said, we can try to catch it up. Since we've got 2 months here, we can still try to hit the April date for that one as well. And for the comprehensive plan amendment, it'll have the first reading now in April, but the second reading will be held until the fall because the code requires that all proposed comprehensive plan amendments are considered together so that the council can look at the full impact and then adopt one amendment to the comp plan per year. Okay, wireless code. So like we said at the beginning, this is getting pushed back to March. It just took us a little longer to get our legal counsel on board and get started on that process. But we've now asked Eileen Kiefer from Journal Law to step in as our outside counsel. She's been working with our department on some other matters already. So staff, we know her and we've got a working relationship with her. And she's also been working on similar wireless code amendments for City of Sammamish and Beaux-Arts Village. So she's got some good experience in understanding the FCC regulations and already working with a couple of nearby communities on similar updates. So I think she'll be able to bring in and draw from the experience and the drafting that she's done in those other cities. Oh, I see I have a typo here. Sorry about that. So the scope of work will be, like we talked about, focused on better aligning with the federal regulations and then cleaning up some code references and adding definitions. And then what we talked about last time was this final bit here.
Sorry, this is Lisa. Can you slow down a bit? I'm
Sure,
so sorry. Okay, thank you.
So in 2020, the Planning Commission began meeting about the wireless code and identified a few priority issues that we wanted to dig into in addition to the code cleanup and aligning with federal regulations. And those were primarily three things. One related to the location and type of the support structures for wireless facilities. So whether they're going on existing buildings or poles or new poles or light fixtures, et cetera. And then the aesthetics and the design of how, the actual facility or antenna looks when it's on that pole or building. And then noise was the final one. I know with the deployment that happened a year or two ago for Verizon, some of the small cell equipment was fairly noisy and there was like a fan, like a cooling fan noise. And so I think the commission talked about trying to regulate the amount of noise that was produced from this equipment. So what I've asked Eileen, we've just had our initial kind of kickoff meeting for this project. And I asked her to look for simple ways to address these kinds of issues in the code. And if she's already talked through some of the options with Sammamish and Beaux-Arts, maybe she could perhaps suggest some language for us at the next meeting that would address these topics. Like I told you guys last month, I don't think we have time to get into an extensive, multi-meeting drafting process, but I'm hoping that we can find some code language that would address these issues that I know you all have identified and we've heard from the community in the past as being concerns. I think as you guys have heard, there's limits to what we can do, like the federal regulations preempt a lot of our land use authority on these wireless and small cell facilities. So we're pretty restricted in what we can do. And I'm hoping that Eileen can just suggest some language that kind of threads the needle there to fit within the authority that we do have and to provide some simple guidance around where these can go, how they look and how they sound. So that's what I've got for an update. Does anyone have questions or further comments on that? We will delve into it in a much longer discussion next month.
Any questions? Commissioner Boatsman, I know you had sent a couple of emails on this earlier. Did the questions you had get answered around the process here?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because what I had asked for actually was, what did we already discuss before? So are you able to bring that before us, our previous comments that were tracked and kept record of from before?
Yeah, well, I looked through the notes that Robin Probsting had taken from the prior meetings, and I also looked at some of the PowerPoint presentations. That's basically what I have available in terms of the record from what you guys previously discussed. And the 3 items I mentioned seemed like they were the ones that had been identified by the commission last year as the issues that you wanted to spend more time discussing and providing direction on for the staff to draft code language around. Is there something else that you were hoping that I would bring up?
Yeah, no, I recognize these as being the items that we were the most interested in, but we talked about these things at length and came to some tentative conclusions as to directions that we wanted to try to head.
Uh-huh.
And
Okay.
looking for.
I did see in the notes, like in particular about the location, it seemed like there had been a fair amount of discussion on, which kind of locations were appropriate or not appropriate for cell facilities, and areas like critical areas, wetlands, water courses, et cetera, were not appropriate. And I think there was a preference for co-locating or going on existing commercial buildings, street lights, stoplights, things like that. So I did see in the notes some specific ideas like that. And then I think there was a little bit about kind of the aesthetics of, within those location preferences, then what does it actually look like on the pole or on the building? And there was some preferences for things that were kind of concealed either inside of a new pole, or if it's in the town center, maybe surrounded by those kind of banner things that you see on streetlights, or if they can be placed on existing buildings in a way that's not too obtrusive. I saw those kind of suggestions, and I've passed that on to Eileen for her to consider as she's looking for simple ways to put together some code language to start addressing these issues. We'll definitely be bringing back some more fleshed out ideas on, how could you create some regulations around that.
Regulations.
Lisa, I think your mic may be coming off of mute.
I'm so sorry, you guys. I'm really
it's okay.
tired. I'm so sorry.
You're doing a great job. Did that answer your question, Carolyn?
Yeah.
Well, it sounds to me like this probably is getting to what I was looking for, like the preliminary direction and interest that the commission had expressed last year has been shared with the consultant. So I would imagine and would hope that when the consultant comes back to us, that those are reflected in where she starts, although certainly we want to hear about new ideas, I should think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's definitely part of the scope of work we gave her, is that if she has other recommendations on things to include or not include, that she will also bring those forward.
Great.
And I anticipate, like, we just had a very brief kind of kickoff meeting to get her started, and I anticipate that myself and other staff will be meeting with her in the interim, the next few weeks before the March Planning Commission meeting. And so we'll be giving her some additional feedback, and we'll be going back and forth on some ideas. So I'm happy to keep talking with her about how to reflect this feedback in what she's drafting and the ideas that she's bringing forward for you to consider next time.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions for Allison related to the process for the wireless code discussion at the next meeting? And I guess one, Allison, is that Eileen will be joining us at that meeting for the work session. Is that my
Yep.
understanding?
She'll be here, and the plan is that, I don't think she'll have a full draft of the code ready because we'll need a little more feedback from all of you before we can get to that point. But I think she'll have broken out some key sections or questions where she wants to get feedback, and she may have some alternate options for you to consider, or in some cases, it might be more of a recommendation, like, we're pretty restricted in what we can do in this area because of how the FCC regulates things. So here's how I'd recommend you go about this. And she might have something more concrete. So I think it'll be a mix of things where there's some options for you to weigh in on, and then sometimes some more concrete drafted language that's, kind of trying to respond to areas where we have less control.
Great. Commissioner Murphy.
Quick question. Is there someplace, Allison, that we can look besides the existing code for information on type of issues that Carolyn's talking about from before, or that currently need updating, or, where the issues lie?
Perhaps what would be helpful is if I were to send you some of the PowerPoint presentations that the commission went through last year with staff. That might help you kind of catch up in your understanding to where the other commissioners are at, Commissioner Murphy.
That'd be great.
I think everybody else was here last year, and so you are a little behind probably in getting up to speed on things. So I'd be happy to provide you with those materials from last year. And if you have questions, we could talk offline too.
That'd be great. Thank you.
There was also a fairly extensive packet for the February 5th, 2020 meeting where the commission reviewed this. So that's another good resource for you, Commissioner Murphy. And I can send you a link to that.
Commissioner Boatsman.
I would suggest sending that link maybe to everybody.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. We'll just send email out with all the information in case anyone
Thanks.
wants to refresh on it.
Okay.
Great. Allison, do you have anything else?
That's all I've got for now. Yeah, I don't have a report on any other issues at this point, and I think we'll be back next month with a focus on the wireless and the work session on that, and we'll also briefly touch back on Goldbach 2 with the redrafted language there, and hopefully at that point you'll be ready to make a recommendation.
I think we will. Great. So no deputy director's report from you this evening for anything else?
No, that's all I've got.
Okay. Looking at future meetings, I think, Andrea, our next meeting is the 20th of March. Is that correct?
March 17th, Chair.
17th. God, my math is so bad.
March and
Great.
February mirror each other.
That's why it messes me up. So great. March 17th is our next meeting. Is anybody, are any of the commissioners knowingly going to be absent at this point? I see everyone shaking their heads that there's no current known absences, so that is great. So that is all we have this that is all we have for the rest of this evening. Does anyone, do any of the commissioners have anything for the good of the order that they would like to either ask or share before we adjourn? Great. Hearing none, I want to say thank you to Lisa, who, if anybody's listening, heard chime in earlier, who is our lovely captioner for Vice Chair Meacham, who has been working with us for years. And so we appreciate that it's probably been a long day for you. So thank you, Lisa, for joining us this evening. And I know this is probably super difficult virtually, so we really appreciate the effort that you do, because I know that that is tremendously helpful to the vice chair. So thank you there. Thank you to staff. Andrea, do you have anything for us?
No, Chair.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. And we will see you in a month. Meeting is adjourned.